Welcome to Finale Ligure, Italy, folks. We're here with the brand new Pivot Firebird. Come along as we dissect this bike and see how it rides. All right, everybody. So what is new and what has remained the same on the Pivot Firebird? Well, there's quite a bit to talk about. In fact, it is completely redesigned from the ground up, essentially. However, Pivot was also asked by their team racers, namely Morgan Schar, who has put the previous generation Firebird on several podiums. She didn't want this thing to get messed up. Wow. Before we get into it, again, this is part of our Dissected series. Pivot flew us out here with several other media outlets to learn about the bike, meet with their team, and ride together. And while we have spent 5 amazing days riding this bike, this is not a review or an endorsement of this bike by any means. We're simply going to try to share with you some of the features, updates, and what is new about this bike, as well as the goals that Pivot had in trying to not mess this thing up as some of their racers and athletes had requested they'd not do. So first up, let's talk about some of the major changes to the frame features and geometry, and then I'm going to get into some of the other features about the bike I think will be important to talk about for consumers and riders who maybe didn't love a previous generation Firebird, or maybe who did and are worried that this bike won't be for them anymore, and then share, of course, my first ride impressions, which have been stellar here in Italy. I mean, how could they not be? So we're here with Brian Mason, the president of Pivot Cycles. First of all, amazing time here. Thank you so much.
We're glad you came out.
Been rad. And I guess some of the first things I'd like to ask about the Pivot Firebird update. What were some of the things, feedback from consumers, athletes, dealers that you wanted to keep, but also what were some of the things that they were asking for that you wanted to improve upon that bike?
But we wanted to offer people a little bit more adjustability, or in this case, a lot of adjustability. We don't really consider this like an update. For us, this is a ground up redesign, but we wanted to keep the DNA and what makes the Firebird special in this bike as well.
All right, so first up, let's get into the geometry of this bike. I'm 5'11". I weigh about 188 pounds, and I have been riding this size large. It has a 485 millimeter reach in this configuration. The bottom bracket has got 5 millimeters lower. You've got a bottom bracket height of 34.9. The bottom bracket drop is 2.5. Stack height is 64.2. The overall wheelbase in the long is 128, and the chainstay length goes from 443 to 435. Seat tube angle sits at 77 degrees, and the head tube angle is 63.8. I would say it's conservatively aggressive, I guess it would be a way that I would kind of put this bike. I think it lets riders get, do, and be what they want on an enduro bike without being too polarizing. Suspension changes to kinematics, the feel of the bike. Can you talk about that first?
Yeah, so we did a couple of things, a little bit longer rear axle path, more rear axle path to give it a little bit rollover, let it keep its speed a little bit more. So that changed a little bit in the kinematics. And then we were really focused on a ton of adjustability. The new Float X2 has more volume spacers than you've ever been able to do. You can move them in small increments, so you can run them from, I think, 3 to 16. And so that's a really nice piece. But also So we have 2 different shock settings. So there's a linear and a progressive, and it's a really easy flip chip move. And then we wanted to give adjustability and geometry as well. So there is a adjustable chainstay length. So there is a long and short for every size, and they're also size specific, so by each model. Additionally, you're seeing the ZS56 top and bottom on the headset. Those people who want to play with reach adjust, they want to play with angle set, tons of adjustability there. And then we also have our patented flip chip. We've been using this for a while. It gives us 2 really nice settings, kind of a low and a high setting. So it allows you to have different geometries, but also if you want to run it mixed wheel, we offer a mixed wheel in this. And we added an extra small as well. Yeah, which is huge. It's 27.5 only, but that was something when you said, you know, what are riders asking for specifically, we couldn't accommodate every rider. Okay. And now we can. We're really excited about that.
All right, so extra small through extra large.
Yeah. All right. A rider from 4'11" to 6'5" could fit on this bike.
Yeah, bud. I did start with the bike in the short position, which Pivot set all the bikes up in because that was most close to their outgoing Firebird. I definitely felt some pros and things that I liked about that shorter chainstay, which Pivot I think is kind of known for in a lot of their bikes, and it suits their Phoenix desert riding style. There were also some areas that I just felt the bike maybe felt a little imbalanced for like some of the Finale speeds and chunk. And so I quickly moved to the long position, which is again 8 millimeters, and it's a significant and notable difference. One thing to note is due to SRAM's transmission T-type requirements, there's a pretty tight window, so you will need to add 2 links to your chain, or more appropriately, you will need a second chain that is about 2 links longer roughly. This bike can really be tuned for a whole lot of different riders and different terrains, which I'm personally a big fan of, even though I don't really do a ton of swapping around once I kind of get my bikes dialed. It's great that people can get one bike and not have it be just designed and built for that brand's area, right? Like whether that's a bike that's designed just to ride in Squamish and sucks in, you know, Tennessee or Bentonville, or a brand that's, you know, maybe making a bike in Phoenix that rips there and isn't so great in, you know, the Northeast. So the adjustability thing is really cool and something I like. Moving into some of the other frame features, if you caught our video on the Trailcat, you might remember the new Pivot tool shed. That was something that Ed Masters was really excited about bringing over to this new bike. He wanted to be able to store snacks and food, tools, jackets, whatever else you want to put in there. It's incredibly easy, and I think it's probably one of the best systems from both an ease of use and a kind of weatherproof sealed aspect that I've seen or used. So as I mentioned earlier, 165 millimeters of travel out of this brand new 2026 Fox X2, which is a vast improvement in my opinion. Didn't love the old shock. Well, it's not that I didn't love it. It took a very long time to tune and to get it feeling exactly right. This new shock was a lot easier for me to find a happy place in. I look forward to getting it home on my normal trails, riding with it there and seeing if I'm still as happy. But so far, what I can say is big improvement, and I'm very stoked. Now again, we spent some time here riding with Alex, who works for Fox, and one of his main tasks there is tuning, developing, building shocks, and working with brands to optimize tunes for their bikes. And it was really cool to be able to ride with him and learn about that shock development process. We were told Chris Kokalis and the team at Pivot have never worked so long and so hard on a custom shock tune as they did on this bike. That, combined with the improvement in this new X2, is readily apparent to anyone who hopped on it and rode this week. From a descending standpoint, bump compliant standpoint, I really, really like this shock and how it feels. I know some of the guys experimented this week with moving it into the linear setting. I didn't really experiment with that. I played more with the short and long settings. And again, I left it in low, but I didn't want to go to the linear setting. I probably will for our long-term test just to see what it feels like. But I was regularly putting that O-ring up at the top during our riding here. And to me, if I went to linear, that would just mean I'd be blowing through that travel a bit harder and a bit more. Both Seb Stott, who's here from Pink Bike, and I noticed that when we moved the bike into the long chainstay setting, that it did slightly affect the suspension's feel, right? Having that little bit longer chainstay changes the leverage that you have over that shock as it's experiencing impact. I just added a bit more compression and found that did a pretty good job of kind of canceling out much of that. Might be worth adding about 5 psi to the shock as well, but again, pretty small, but a noticeable difference if you're a rider who is very in tune with your bike and how it's performing. So a couple last things before we get into the ride impressions and how I thought this bike has performed. Behind me are 2 of the colors. We've got the YOLO and white gold. There's also a limited edition color. I think there's only gonna be about 200 of them made. And that is a really cool color, that Morgan. Char was riding here in Finale. We also saw the frame. So if you like that, go ahead and get your name in on one quickly. Speaking of getting a name on a bike quickly, these bikes during the embargo lift here will be very limited. We were told that Pivot should have a much larger shipment coming in the next couple of weeks. So depending on when you're watching this video, if it just came out today, call your dealer. There probably won't be too many around, but rest assured that in the upcoming weeks here, there should be a whole lot more coming.
How many build specs and models will be available?
Well, I mean, it's a Pivot, so we've got several. Yeah, so it is available basically in a ride, pro, and team option from us, which is kind of like good, better, best.
Okay.
And then each of those has a Shimano and a SRAM option as well. And then there's a ton of upgrades that you can do. So Live Valve Neo, carbon wheel upgrades for some of the builds. So a really, really kind of dealer's choice in that case, right?
Okay.
Weights on the bikes, 6.8 pounds for the frame and 32.3 pounds is what the highest level build comes out at for a complete. Obviously weights will increase slightly, but you're looking at roughly, you know, low 32s to probably 33.5-ish pounds for a pretty stout and burly 165, 170 bike. So I'd say that's pretty impressive and a pretty solid weight class. So with that out of the way, how does the bike ride? I gotta say, I have been really happy overall. The week that we've been here in Finale has taken us on everything from really steep, kind of shooty little rock gardens to, you know, like bobsled tracks that are just like bowled out, chicane filled, like unbelievably amazing rides. By the way, if you guys have not been to Finale, put it on your to-do list. This place is absolutely amazing. Check out Evolve Bike Shop. They've got an amazing shuttle and guide service, and thanks to them for showing us around this week, but holy moly, amazing trails. There have also been a lot of kind of flatter gradient, route rocky trails with kind of some flat, unsupported turns, a lot of tight berms, a couple little jumps. So we've really put the bikes through a pretty wide field of testing and training. You know, again, this is not a long-term review. You know, we've only had about the week here, and you know, this video is made with Pivot, who flew us out here. So we're not gonna endorse or say this bike, you gotta go buy it. But what I can say is I've had a lot of fun riding this bike. It feels amazing. I think personally it looks amazing, and I really am happy with the improvements that they've made to this bike. Again, I've switched to running the bike in the long position. There may be some downsides. Well, there definitely are. There's downsides to everything always. For a climbing standpoint, I felt that the longer rear end would sort of hang up. It would take a little longer before it would hit an obstacle. Also in some really tighter sections of trail, the little longer rear end takes a little more work. However, I felt that the downsides of the longer chainstay were less drastic or less like impactful to my ride than the downsides of the short chainstay were. For me, and where I'm willing to make sacrifices and compromises, because nothing can ever be perfect and do everything perfectly, I'm okay making the sacrifices that of the long chainstay because of the pros that it gives me. Increased stability, a better balance in the bike from front to back, where I really enjoyed this bike after making that swap was like the power position when you're standing over the bike and kind of dipping it over or leaning a little bit in flatter corners, a little bit looser turns when the speeds are high. That shorter rear end, it would sometimes break loose, especially with these Continental tires, which I really liked before I got here. I don't dislike them now. I kind of do, maybe a little bit. They do some stuff really well, but there's just some areas that they kind of have downsides, and there just is a lot of that type of terrain here in Finale, without going too deep into the weeds on tires, right? Because those usually get worn out and come off a bike. I just felt like the back end, I could very easily get it to step out and snap beyond where I wanted it to. It was awesome for playing and having fun, but like if it was like go time, it was just a little bit more of a razor edge. That longer rear end, it would allow me to just have a nice predictable amount of a drift if I wanted to get that back end out to maybe avoid a loose rock that had been kicked up by the rider in front of me, or there was like a big root sticking out. I could just push that back end and just really nicely get it out there, but like it wouldn't come out from behind me, it would just stay put. And I just loved that extra footprint on the trail. The suspension was incredibly plush, I would say, which is not always what I would say about a pivot bike. 33% sag, this new X2 shock, I just really got along with it quickly. I spend a lot of time tuning X2 shocks, and you know, if you've noticed in some of the other test bikes that I've gotten from Pivot, I usually don't have an X2 on those bikes, right? I'll either have a Float X or a coil shock. I just find that they were a bit harder to tune and to get into a happy spot to where it wasn't feeling kind of harsh and thuddy, and this did not have any of that. So the new tune is really awesome, as well as the brand new shock. So the geo settings for me, 5'11", 485 reach is what I like. Overall, the ride quality of the frame is stiff but not abusive. I found the bike to be pretty comfortable. That side stiffness out of that rear end was really nice. It's worth noting, Pivot does a proprietary ride specific or size specific carbon tuning. So everything from the tube shape, the diameters, the carbon layup schedule, all of that stuff is changed so that, you know, a lighter rider on an extra small doesn't have the same stiffness of frame as an extra large rider. So every bike's gonna have its own different feel that will more likely match the average weight of riders in that category. So 188 pounds, the size large, was definitely not flexy, at least in the conditions that we were able to ride here. I thought it was not abusive and stiff either, so a really nice blend there. Extremely quiet. Cable routing management is really solid in this bike. It does have ports, so for those of you who hate frames that don't have ports, they've got them. There's a new 35mm bar that Pivot just came out with. They said it has tested more compliant than the 1UP bar, which is a personal favorite of mine. So that was really cool to learn about and get to ride quite a bit. I mean, the amount of elevation vert that we did here shuttling on rough, rocky trails, it was welcome and I appreciated it. I had the opportunity, I didn't make the time to test the bike here in the 27.5 rear end. Honestly, I was just so happy with it in the 29 setting that I didn't really want to detract from my time and make too many switches between, you know, the short and the long, and then changing wheel sizes to dilute any more of my time. I just wanted to focus on riding, and to be honest, I was just having way too much fun, so I'm sorry. We'll try to do that at home for the long-term test. To be honest, I don't think I would go to the mullet, and that was another reason I didn't really make the time to do it. The bike just rode so well for me, and with the speeds and the sharpness of the rocks here, I just thought the smaller rear wheel would hang up more, give me more feedback, a little more stiff and harsh feel as I was hitting those rocks rather than rolling over them. And again, the speeds are high here, and I just wanted to go fast and plow stuff over. So for me, the 29er was the way to go. I would say really, folks, that's kind of the long and the short of it on the new Firebird. So far for me, very happy, excited to get one home, excited for the chairlift to start spinning, to pedal it in some backcountry rides, get out and get some big shuttles in places like Oak Ridge, and really just see what this bike's all about. on some of our trails in the Pacific Northwest light. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you have any questions or comments about the new bike, maybe what's exciting or interesting, or what you think is still missing on the new bike, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks again, guys. We hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you out on the trails.